You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. As we travel through the Twilight Zone, we've now got through to the 5th episode, and we're going to be walking the distance to the local town and visiting our childhood homes. That's right, we are going to do in walking distance. A gentleman pulls into a garage for his petrol, and in doing so, sees a sign for his old hometown, and realizes it's only a mile and a half away. He goes there and has a walk to town, but finds that it's very similar to how it was when he lived there. So we'll leave it at that. So Julian, what are your thoughts on walking distance?
Well, I said previously that, and you agreed that the previous episode was the best yet. I think this is the best yet, again. And it was a few years back, I made it sort of like halfway through the Twilight Zone, going straight through. And this one is the first one that I really remembered. And that really stuck with me. I have a lot of thoughts about this, especially as an American, with the Americana and nostalgia and concepts of childhood, and as an American who grew up in a small town, even if it was decades after this episode aired.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'll let you get into it because I have a slightly different view on this from being a Brit, I think. And again, I like it. I think there's some good bits in this. There's some technicalities I call out, and I think that, again, sort of like this is almost like the Back to the Future thing of like he goes back and he acknowledges it's 25 years, pretty much. That he's
20 years.
Yeah. If I was to go back 20 years, I think I'd recognise that I've gone back 20 years just from looking around and going, wow, there's a great difference in fashion and car. I mean, they all come up in the show, but like you would know it instantly. And so this got me thinking, like, okay, if he's gone back 20, 25 years, like what's the difference in, you say about Americana, like what would be the social and technological advances that would identify that difference? Where it'd be like, okay, well, no one's walking around with a smartphone, and it would be blatantly obvious. If I was to go back to my 11-year-old self, when I was 11 now, mid 90s, well, early 90s, let's be honest, I'm not going to lie. Like the difference in clothes and technology would be vastly different. So that was just the one part, the one nitpick I actually had in this episode was when he's walking around going, well, this looks familiar. And I'd be going like, God damn, everyone's wearing naffy jeans and, wearing acid smiley faces all over the place. Like it would look extremely different. But other than that, I agree. Actually, I really enjoyed this episode.
I think that's part and parcel of sort of what we talked about in a previous episode of how like they kind of stretch out the reveal, right? But in fairness, I think that it's easy for me to imagine that he's not seeing a bunch of cars on the street and he goes into that ice cream shop. And you do get a car later, where it's like, oh, this is right off the assembly line, a roadster. And boy, it's that ice cream shop, which I associate with the 50s, but which is a 1930s ice cream shop, with 3 scoops and the soda.
The soda.
Which of course getting into sort of the issue of nostalgia, and I look at and I get emotional thinking about, because that's the kind of thing that I loved as a kid. But of course, now if I tasted it now, I'd be like, this is disgusting. How do people how did I eat this and think this is good? But I do like the kind of slow reveal and the old man upstairs and the price of the ice cream. And for my money, it's kind of a little easier to believe that small towns are a little backward, especially in the Midwest, especially in 1959.
Yeah.
And yeah, if he sees the cars and the clothes, you're right. But, you can easily imagine, like, that ice cream shop doesn't look all that different.
No. I mean, to be fair, I can imagine if the British equivalent of this would probably be a small village somewhere in Surrey or somewhere like that, in the home counties, where it's like, hasn't changed since Victoria was on the throne.
It's The Prisoner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. It would be exactly like that. So I can imagine it to some extent. I think my thing is, I came from a city, and I saw that city change vastly during my childhood, and so to see it, if I was to go back to my childhood and was to walk around that city, I'd be like, huh. This is hugely different to how I remember this sort of like. To be fair, I actually recently drove through my whole old. I didn't get transported back to 1992, but I recently drove around Coventry on the ring road where I live, and it is massively different from just a couple of years that I was there last. So it's, I can see the difference. Even I was going, oh, bloody hell, these buildings have shot up, that sort of thing. So it's interesting how those things change. I say, especially with more rural or sort of small towns.
Well, that brings me to one of my observations, which is like, so I mean, I moved around a lot, but I ended up settling in third grade. For the first time, I had a teacher for a full year. I had moved around so much, which kind of messed me up. But then from third grade through high school, I was, basically in the same small town. And when I moved there was a cornfield behind my house. I jumped a ravine on a dare and got lost in the woods and, navigated by sunlight and the sun's position and came out, 2 hours later, exhausted in another town. All of that's gone now. All of that's development. So that town has changed a lot. And I know what you mean. I mean, especially in, like I lived in Waikiki in, in Honolulu. And it was like one of the things I loved about it was you blink, you come back, and it's like that restaurant's gone. The building's been torn down and it's been replaced with a brand new building that's got something else in it. And it's like, when did that even happen? I went there a week ago. There's that weird, just kind of like, it's almost like, something in like Flex Mentallo of like, they changed the panels between, but to get to like that sense of change, I, having had that experience, I hated growing up in a small town. I hated, that there was a cornfield behind my house. I mean, I liked going into the woods and stuff. I was a boy, but I felt stifled. I mean, so in a weird way, this is a poetic, very beautiful, moving depiction of an America that not only precedes me, but that I do have some connection to. I mean, it strikes me as the ice cream soda, the bandstand. I mean, I know that bandstand. There's a bandstand in my town. I mean, I sat outside and listened to my dad play in it, as a kid, and I was reading comics, or whatever. The baseball, the carousel. I mean, these are icons from my childhood. And I look back nostalgically and I feel something about them. And yet at the same time, my experience of those things was not of like the summer of my life that it's depicted in this film. I don't know. I don't understand that concept. My depiction was like, yeah, things are not okay at home. My parents are talking divorce and, mom's drinking and, I'm already getting depressed and don't know if I'm a good person or not, and kind of feel stifled in the small town. And yet this stuff really, this kind of Americana, just, I guess because I'm a Yank, it's just in my DNA.
Well, I think there were two things. I think it does. I think it comes down to national identity, because there is British equivalence of this. Like, there's definitely a British equivalency of you looking back, especially for nostalgia for that thing of the 80s or your childhood. And I remember sort of like this similar era. You say about the summer of your life. Like, I remember summers, you finish school and you got 6 weeks ahead of you, and that's it. Then you do this. I remember those summers to an extent, like with fond rose tinted glasses. And I'm pretty sure if I went back to them now, if I was to be, if I was to Sam Beckett it and quantum leap myself back to then, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't enjoy it. There'd be this thing of going, oh yeah, actually this sucked. Like, it wasn't great. I hated, me and my sister fought continuously. Like, there was always the different things going on. But you look back with nostalgia. But one of the things that this came up to me was like the Stephen King of this is ringing loud and clear in my ears. Like Stand By Me is clearly is part of this. The children from It, and there's this sort of this idea of sort of the summer of your life thing really does. It's definitely, it made me think of it. It's definitely this American idea. Like summer of '69. Even like Bryan Adams, this sort of like this idea, that summer that you changed, that summer that you grew up, or there's always this idea of this that it's always summer.
You kiss someone for the first time, and found a dead body.
Yeah, all the same thing. They may be the same day, the same event. I don't know.
Well, that was my first kiss. Kissing the dead body. I thought.
And that's what Stephen King is writing about now. But yeah, that definitely feels like an Americana idea, because I think that there is a British equivalency, but it's less romantic. At least it's usually, more about, like, say, what do they call them? Latchkey kids. You're kicked out at 9 a.m. because everyone's gone to work, and you're let back in the house at 5 p.m. and everyone's back. And that, for the rest of the time, don't kill yourself, and more, and those sorts of things. And so there is that equivalency of going off, playing in the park and riding bikes for hours and all sort of stuff. But I don't think it has the same sort of like national nostalgia, I think, that it does in that American ideal, which I do find interesting, really, because there's obviously there's a Western thing. So this didn't hit me in that place, but it did hit me in a very different way, which you've sort of alluded to, is what do you leave behind as you grow up? This idea of his dad says that that's the summer of his life at the end, when his dad sort of realizes who he is. But this idea of what you leave behind as you get older, and it's funny that when we first started talking this evening, I was talking about work, and sort of like you get to a point where you're like, it's all crap. It's all crap. You've just got to do your best and carry on. But this is what life is. And then you enjoy the little things, like you say, time with your family or doing things like this. But what is it you leave behind, that these ideals you had as a child? And that sort of really struck me a little bit towards the end of this episode. So yeah.
I mean, I agree with that, and I think that there's the whole like Back to the Future plot, and I think you're right in all of these references that you've made. Of sort of like seeing your dad, and the implication is his mom has died. And of course, we also live in an era in which, I mean, you and I are doing a podcast, and first of all, thank God for technology. I mean, but you and I are doing a podcast about sci-fi stuff, and you do 20th Century Geek, and we publish about comics and stuff like that. There is a sort of like Arrested Development that would have been called Arrested Development when we were kids.
The Peter Pan syndrome.
Yes, Peter Pan syndrome. Arrested Development. In fact, I remember being a teenager in high school and, hanging out with my friends and going to comic shops. And one of them was bemoaning how, none of us had girlfriends. And he said, like, what are we going to say? Does Arrested Development turn you on? And, that's sort of like, we all sort of realized at the moment, oh, we're screwed, aren't we?
Yeah.
But so we live in a culture in which that's kind of hip. But in this time, it's clear that he's a VP of media. He lives in New York in an apartment. He's made it. And yet he has this nostalgic yearning for childhood. And so there's this idea that childhood should be a time of innocence, right? And we sometimes say this today, like, I never had a childhood, right? Because I never was able to be innocent. I had abuse or whatever. That's not what childhood ever meant through human history, right? So it's this very 20th century, a very American idea of, and also white. It's shot through with white privilege, male
Yeah.
privilege. You know, that childhood is this wonderful, innocent time, and also this presumption that when you get older, you should put away childhood
Yeah.
things. And I think all of that is problematic. I'm troubled by all of that, and yet there's still truth to it, and I'm still moved by this episode.
No, I agree. I think I say when he sees his parents and this thing of, and especially his mother and this other stuff, I get that. This idea of the nostalgia and being able to do the things that I understand that, but yeah, this idea of Arrested Development and stuff, and saying of growing up. One of the weird things is, as I say, up until about the 1930s, teenagers didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't teenagers. You got to an age, you left school at 12, and you went into work. And you went in the mines, and if you didn't like it, tough. That was it, and that was it till you're sort of dead in your 50s. And then, like I say, they elongated education and all this other stuff, and they created the teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
The term teenager wasn't used until 1942,
Mm-hmm.
so not even that long before this series was made. So it's interesting. They say this idea one of the things I found interesting about this was the ages that they were choosing these characters to be, because that summer of his life is he's 11, and that's still young. He's like, oh yeah, this is the summer of his life, and after that, what? It's crap. Like, is it downward from there? But he sounds like he's doing good. He's only 36. We're both beyond 36. He's 36 and he's made it, and there's this a yearning for that thing. So it's interesting, like, to see how this has shifted. To an extent, kids are getting older, younger. However, there is still this thing of that's part of this Arrested Development. So I did find the aging of this interesting as well.
Also today, nobody, in both of our countries, but especially here with the income gap, nobody can imagine somebody having made it at that age. The idea that you're settled at that age is so absurd these days.
Yeah. Final thought then, just from this, the one of the element in respect to it is the time travel. There's an element of this of he does see his younger self, because at first you're wondering if it's some sort of fantasy or whatever, but it solidifies when, during him trying to speak to his younger self falls off a carousel and injures his leg. And he falls down and sort of like in pain at that moment, feels the same pain. And then that leg injury he acknowledges later on when he goes back and sees the same thing, like the soda shop or whatever, the ice cream parlor in the 50s. I know you have very specific views on time travel. What were your thoughts on just that before we sort of, as a final point?
Well, I think you would say it's daft. I mean, it's dumb. And obviously, it would have been better if from the start he had a limp and you watched him walking the 1.5 miles into town with a limp. And then it's like, oh yeah, I remember falling off the carousel. And it seems as if, like, at that moment, time changes and he, so yeah, I mean, that's a weaker element. For sure. I don't like that. I would say that, I wanted to mention, his talk with his dad and sort of like him going crazy. And he has this wonderful talk with his dad. And his dad, he's left a wallet after fleeing the house when he visited for the second time. And the wallet is like, look, not only does it have your name, Martin Sloan, but, the bills are all from years that haven't happened yet. Okay, I believe you. And he says, you've got to leave. This is young Martha's time. It's not about you. And I love what he says. It's very loving. It's very like, I don't know how this happened, right? We're in the Twilight Zone. Like, I don't know time travel, and neither do you. But I do know that, it's this sort of like Martin deserves a childhood, which is, again, problematic, and this idea of childhood innocence. But I do love what he says about, look ahead. And I think that, as you get older and, you remember sort of the time of your life, or you remember, when your body was young and things were simpler and you romanticize it. In the previous Twilight Zone episode, we dealt with nostalgia too.
Yeah.
That I think it's so important, and I really believe this, to constantly be looking ahead and constantly say, you know, yeah, okay, so that was a good period. So I'm dealing with these challenges right now. But my job is to create a new golden age. I think this is important for us personally and for nations to not look back and to instead say, look, it's not going to be the same, but it's going to be better in some ways and worse in others. But we can, find the next 3 scoop of ice cream, soda, whatever that is. And maybe that's kale in my case, but and I love it. But so that matters a lot to me.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's a great episode for that, I think, and I do like to say I definitely twin it with the last one. I think it has a slightly conflicting message, but I love them both. So yes, anyway, so that's it. So we've run a little over on this one, but I think it was well deserved. So any final thoughts on the walking distance?
No, I'm all good. It just gets me right here.
No, it's a good episode, solid episode. I liked a lot what's going on. I do like that conversation with his dad at the end. I love that his dad's so pragmatic. His dad's like, yeah, you're clearly from the future, and you're clearly my son. And it's obviously quite a heartfelt moment, but there's not sort of like a, oh my god, like great Scott kind of moment. It's just very well played, and again, it's not overly melodramatic, which I like the fact that they're not doing that. So I really appreciate that. But a good episode, and ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed us talking about it. So it's been a doozy, this one. So thank you very much, and we shall talk to you on the next episode.